Good morning and welcome to the Seafaring Channel. I'm Robert Wilkins, Executive Director of the International Maritime Center and Chief Program Officer for the Seafarers Ministry of the Golden Gate. We are an ecumenical alliance for maritime welfare and community connectedness. Through our member organizations, we provide physical, spiritual, and emotional support to seafarers while they're on ship, as well as hospitality and welcome to seafarers when they are on land in our ports in the Bay Area. We provide transportation, recreation, relaxation, and a bit of time away from ship, learning the communities that they have the opportunity to visit. We give them the opportunity to get a firsthand look at that and to meet some of us who are here in the Bay Area. We are in Oakland. We are also engaged in global advocacy on their behalf in terms of their worker rights, compensation, safety and training conditions, and all in the spirit of upholding their dignity and their well-being. Finally, we conduct programs to inform the broader community about the importance of maritime and the plight and opportunities of the seafarers and those who make our ports and our shipping industry work. We also invite the community to the Maritime Shore, to our center in particular, where we host a variety of activities to make the community aware of and adamant about the asset that the maritime atmosphere is. And we invite you to our center here in Portview Park in Oakland, California, right in the Port of Oakland. We want to thank you for joining us today for our first ever webcast of Maritime Community Connections, Maritime Cultural Currents, an education initiative sponsored by the Seafarers Ministry of the Golden Gate, which explores the connections between various cultures and the maritime environment, how the waters have shaped culture and how various cultures have had an impact on the water environment. Today is a special day, not only because it is the first of our webcasts, but it is also the inaugural day for the International Day for Women in Maritime. In December 2021, the International Maritime Organization adopted a resolution that makes May 18th the International Day for Women in Maritime throughout the world. The theme this year is training, visibility, and recognition, supporting a barrier-free working environment for women. At this point, women in maritime, as in many sectors of our society, unfortunately, are well underrepresented, but well qualified and well capable. And in the instances where they do have the opportunity to participate in the workforce, they make a great, great impact. And that's the perfect description for the special guest that we have with us today. We are delighted to welcome to Maritime Cultural Currents, Dr. Elizabeth McNie. She is an associate professor of maritime transportation, marine transportation, she'll clarify the title, at the Cal Maritime Academy in Vallejo. She has a fabulous and interesting career that has spanned the seafaring experience, as well as deep dive research into important maritime topics. Currently, she is a professor and a budding author who has a memoir that will come out that everyone will want to see when it does make publication. So I want to welcome, without further ado, our guest, Dr. Elizabeth McNie. Welcome and good morning, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here today.
As I mentioned, you have had a very fantastic and broad career And why don't we start out with you just telling us a little bit about yourself and just frame your journey for us from where you grew up and came from, and some of the places and highlights of your career, and then we'll zero down and talk about some of the specific experiences and some specific subjects.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I grew up not far from the ports of Oakland, up in the Oakland Hills. And I remember as a kid, feeling when I was dreaming of my future, I would look down the canyons of the Oakland Hills into what is Anchorage 9. I didn't know it at the time, but it's Anchorage 9, where the ships sit at anchor waiting to come to port or waiting to get refueled or whatever. And I used to wonder where they came from, who was on board, where they were going to next, what it would be like to be a member of a ship's crew, a team that seemed to, work together seamlessly to get things done. And I didn't know it at the time, back when I was at that age, but it kind of speaks to my desire to have an adventure when I grew up. And so when I was 19, I had 2 failed college experiences under my belt at the ripe old age of 19. And at that point, decided to go to Alaska to work in the commercial fishing industry. And I really knew very little about it. I'd heard from, like a brother of a friend who had gone up to Alaska to work in the salmon cannery for the summer. So I knew there were summer opportunities up there. So I went to Alaska, drove up there in my car with a friend, and didn't know anything about working in the fishing industry, had no experience. I'd worked in a coffee shop in Berkeley. That was about the extent of my employment experience. And with just how luck would have it, I ended up on a fish processing ship within about a day of arriving in the state. And that started my experience working in the commercial fishing industry. And I went from, working on the slime line, which is where the fish gets processed and boxed and frozen, and worked my way up on deck and into the offloading crew. And from there, bounced around in the commercial fishing industry for a few years, working on longliners, fishing for black cod and halibut, working on gill netters, fishing for salmon, working in a fillet house. I used to, make my living filleting fish by the pound, get paid by the pound. And then I had a few close calls while I was working in the industry, and realized I wasn't ready to give up the sea, wasn't ready to give up the ocean, but maybe go to work on a larger vessel would be a good idea. And one of my captains mentioned maritime academies and mentioned Cal Maritime. And I thought that maybe I could go to Cal Maritime and take a navigation class over the summer or over the winter rather. And then I found out that it was Cal Maritime was a 4-year Bachelor of Science granting institution that also enabled people to get licenses to become U.S. Merchant Marine officers. And I kind of thought this is the perfect combination of all my interests and goals. It had been a goal of mine and to get a bachelor's degree, to graduate from college, and I wanted to continue to work at sea. And so graduating from Cal Maritime, kind of pulled everything together under one roof. And so I went to Cal Maritime and was actually also did a minor in marine engineering when I was there, but I graduated with a degree in marine transportation, making me a deck officer. From there, I worked on oil tankers and deep sea offshore oil drilling rigs and drilling ships, and then went back to Cal Maritime to teach for a little while. And then from there, I went to graduate school. My goal was always to go back to Cal Maritime. And it took about 15 years to get back to Cal Maritime. And it was I kind of went off in a different direction for a few years, working in academia as a researcher and as a professor, studying climate change and what we call usable science. How do we connect scientists with decision makers to make better decisions? But it was always my goal to get back to Cal Maritime, and I was really lucky to get a job as a professor at Cal Maritime back in 2017. So I came back and I had to renew my license, and so I'm a merchant marine officer and go to sea on their training ship most summers. This summer I didn't. I have a bum knee this summer that I need to take care of, or else I'd be on the training ship right now. But it's been a great journey, and I've been able to do a lot of different things in my life and bring those experiences to bear in how I teach and what I teach, and it's exciting. I'm really happy to be back here.
That's fantastic, and I'm sure that the students are pleased for you to be there. Thank you for sharing that. You have been all around, and as I was listening to your experience, you have actually been, you started out as a person on the boats. You've done research to study about issues related to the field. You are teaching the next generation about what it entails, both from a technical and a human side, as well as being an author who is writing and informing the general world about it. That's quite a fulsome career. But let's go back and begin to fill in a little bit of details back on the boats in Alaska. Were you the only female, or how many of those instances that you were in where you found yourself as the only female? And what was that like?
Yeah, when I worked on the processing ship, there were about 15 other women on a ship with about 80 people, and maybe fewer, maybe 70 people total. So, that was my very first experience in the maritime industry, fishing industry. And it was eye-opening. It was a little daunting to be among so many men. And then on other vessels I worked on, I was the only woman, and in some cases the first woman. And that continued even when I worked in the offshore oil drilling industry. There were some oil rigs where I was the first woman on board. Or one of the first women. So, but in the fishing industry, I was definitely the only woman on board the fishing boats.
And tell us about those trips at sea. How long were they? How far did you go? And in what seasons did that happen? And what was the weather like, to begin to bring in a little bit of your information about weather?
Well, my first commercial fishing trip was on a fishing boat out of Homer, Alaska in December during a blizzard. And I don't know what I was thinking. And I discovered early on that I got seasick. So it was quite a trip. It was only a day, and I was on a trawler, so using a large net to catch our fish. And it boggled my mind that we could be fishing in a snowstorm. And then I realized the fish, 50 fathoms below the surface have no idea that it's a snowstorm and don't care. So that was a wake-up call. But trips on some of the other boats ranged from a few days to 8 to 10 days, depending on where we were fishing. The longer trips were on the long liners. So we would catch the fish and clean them and ice them in the hold. And so they could last for a longer amount of time. And some of the trips, they might have only been a day or two before we offloaded, say on the gill netters, fishing for salmon in Bristol Bay. But we would offload to another vessel. So it still might have been a week or more before we actually made it into a port. So it was a wide variety of time spent, physically out at sea. And fished all the way down the Aleutian Islands, up in Bristol Bay and South Central Alaska and in Southeast Alaska. So it was a great opportunity to see a lot of the state, the coastal state anyway. It's Alaska's an easy state to fall in love with. It's just gorgeous, and the people are wonderful.
What's the longest amount of time that you have been out on a boat or ship?
Oh, probably, about 8 months or so, but that was up in Alaska, and starting in February, ending at the end of October. So really running the full, almost the full year, 8-9 months. But during that time, we get ashore, and even got ashore on deserted islands to still go hiking and relax for a day. But there were, there was some. It was a long haul, a lot of working.
Yes. During those very long trips, and what I'm trying to get at is giving me at first, and those who are watching us now, some insight into the life of seafarers. We at first sight, one might find it very interesting and very enticing, and adventure and swashbuckling and ha ha ha. But that sounds kind of arduous and isolating.
Yeah, I think that's true with working at sea in general. It's hard work, and you're away from your loved ones and your friends and family, and it can be lonely. Even if there are 20 people on board, you only see really a handful of those people in your day-to-day activities on board because of the way the watch rotations work. So going to sea is not for the faint of heart. It involves a lot of trade-offs, and one of the trade-offs is that you're away from your loved ones. And luckily today we have internet access on ships that wasn't there when I started, right, back in the 80s. And so there are more opportunities for people to stay connected to loved ones. I read just recently that the International Labor Organization is called for internet access on board all ships for crew, which I think is a huge step in the right direction, because all of that is just going to help normalize what is fundamentally kind of a different lifestyle than what you're used to growing up, where you're around friends or family. You have a bad day at work at sea, and most of the time you don't have anyone you can call or talk to because you're on the ship. But with internet, that really helps to connect you to loved ones, and makes a big difference.
Well, when you had a bad day at sea pre-internet, what did you do?
Oh man. Oh my goodness. Well, it was easy to just fret about it for a while, and then try to make the most of it. It's like you just have to get back on the horse and keep going, because that was the only option. It was either that or quit. And so quitting didn't seem to be a good option. And so just, making the most of it, learning from mistakes, try not to make the same mistake twice, trying to learn from it, and keep moving forward, but just really, for me, it came down to to a single decision. Do I quit or do I keep going?
Mm,
And if and if the answer is I keep going, then you got to dig deep to figure out how to make that happen.
great. I'm going to take a quote from the synopsis of your forthcoming book, and you said, "I set my sights on becoming a fisherman to test my abilities and as a way to prove my self-worth."
Yeah.
My question is, A, did that happen? And B, what did you learn about yourself that you didn't know in the midst of proving that self-worth?
Yeah. Well, I should add, just briefly that the book is in manuscript form, and I'm looking for an agent, so it's not yet forthcoming. It will be someday.
Yes.
Hopefully very soon. But yeah, I think what I learned is that I did test myself, but not in necessarily the ways that I thought I would test myself, or in, I learned a lot about myself. I learned what I was capable of doing. I learned that what I thought were my limits weren't my limits, but were the sort of artificial constructs that I could keep moving past. I learned that what mattered is sticking to my dreams and my goals. And I really believed at the time that self-worth was sort of defined by one's ability to withstand and overcome hardship. So I felt like if I could do that, if I could prove to myself that I could do that, then I could do that anywhere. And I felt like going to work in the fishing industry in Alaska would do that for me. And especially when I learned that there were very few women fishermen at the time, like that would really be how I would prove that I was worthy. The truth of the matter is I wasn't a great fisherman. And in all honesty, there were so many people I met up there who just had a deep passion for fishing. Like they fished for fun when they weren't commercial fishing. They talked about fishing all the time. They talked about the best lures, the best fishing holes, the best rods. They talked about it all the time. And what I learned when I was up there is that I didn't have a passion for fishing. What I was trying to do was really to just find my own self-worth, and this was a pathway to get there. But what I did find is that I had a passion for the ocean. I loved being at sea. I loved being part of a team, which was, the crew on the fishing boat. I loved having a journey that we were on together. Those are the things that I found that I really loved. And, there were definitely some difficult experiences up there that I had to work through and get over, and realize that I couldn't let the hard times and the difficulties and the disappointments get in the way of what my goals were. And so that was probably one of my biggest takeaways, I think, from my experience up there.
Yes. After you became a merchant marine officer and you went back onto ships and so forth, first of all, tell us what's the difference in the environments, the camaraderie, the psychology of being on a fishing boat over against an oil tanker or an oil rig and the various kinds of ships, and what was the major what did your experience as a previous seafarer, what added value did that bring to you being a merchant marine officer when you went on ship?
Yeah. Well, for starters, when I was working in the commercial fishing industry in Alaska, that was during the 80s, and that was before a lot of laws came into place to make the industry safer. So it was it was a little more, it had a feeling a little more of the Wild West back in the 80s. When I was up there, it was also during a time when the fishing openings were what we call derbies, that were, they open a period in an area for fishing for a certain species, and you fish like crazy for 12, 24, 48, 72, 96 hours, and as much as you possibly can. So it had a different feel back then. But I'd say that feeling part of a crew is still there when you're on a merchant ship. It's very much the same thing. You have a shared common goal of moving a vessel from point A to point B. And you have to rely on the people you work with. It may be that on a fishing vessel, there are fewer people, a lot fewer people. So you get to know your crewmates better and you're around them more often. And I think the risks that you're taking on a commercial fishing boat are a lot bigger than the risks that you're taking on, say, a super tanker or a container ship, or a car carrier, just by virtue of the size. The industry is also much more, has a much greater focus now on safety. And so that's a big difference. But the essence of of working as a team to achieve some common goals is the same. And that really is, for me, one of the exciting parts of being on a ship.
Yes. Now, tell me again, what does the merchant marine officer do on ship?
Right. Well, you have two different tracks that you can take as a merchant marine officer. One is as an engineering officer, and the engineers are in charge of maintaining the propulsion plant and the auxiliary equipment on board. They're in charge of making your fresh water and of treating the sewage. They're in charge of refrigeration and air conditioning. And like I said, the main propulsion, making the ship move. So a lot of responsibility, a lot of engineering activities. And then the second track is becoming a deck officer. And deck officers are in charge of the cargo. They're in charge of navigating the vessel and communications. They're in charge of the safety of the ship and stability, basically moving the ship from point A to point B, mooring and unmooring, medical emergencies on board, etc. So those two departments are independent. Very few people, very few people are both an engineering officer and a deck officer, although there are a couple of unicorns out there who are, but you really sort of choose which career path you want to take and then pursue that. But these departments have to work together, to make the ship run, and there's usually some antagonism between them as well. But they work together to make the ship do its job.
Right, great. Now, you are also a second mate with unlimited tonnage for the oceans. What does that mean?
Okay. Well, there are a number of licenses one can earn that allow you to work on different sized vessels in different locations. And these licenses can be very small, for operating a very small boat, to allowing you to be a captain on the biggest ship that sails. And so by being a second mate unlimited tonnage, it means that I can work on any size vessel up to the rank of a second mate. And the ranks usually go third mate, second mate, chief mate, and then captain on the deck side. And so I have sailed second mate, and second mates usually are responsible for the navigation of the vessel, maintaining all the navigational charts and publications and navigational instruments, things like that. But when you graduate from California Maritime, you get a third mate license that enables you to be a third officer on any size ship in the ocean.
Well, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Let's
It's
switch
pretty
over.
amazing, actually, because it's amazing because a lot of the students come in as 18-year-olds. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And then when they graduate 4 years later, you see the transformation, you see the growth, you see the maturity, and they graduate and they step onto a vessel worth, hundreds of millions of dollars with a cargo and become officers. And it's an amazing journey to watch. So.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about your research career. You focus a lot, one subject that was very interesting to me, and that is you are a strong advocate for the use of scientific information and the appropriate use, and actually the increased use, which in this information age and with a lot of talk about disinformation and misinformation going on now, it seems to be a very important thing. And tell us a little bit about the areas that you work in as it relates to your research and how that information is used or not used, and your efforts to promote the appropriate use of scientific data, particularly with policymakers.
Yeah, well, the problem that that I study is that there's often a disconnect between what scientists do and the information they produce and what decision makers need to make better decisions. And to be honest, a lot of science isn't meant to answer questions and be a factor in a decision. Science is meant to explore and discover and to learn more about our world. But when there are specific problems at hand, so for example, decisions that need to be made about managing water resources, or just, here in California, or managing a forest in Colorado, or making decisions about agriculture. Decision makers and policymakers often need specific answers to specific questions, and science doesn't necessarily do that very well. So what I have done with my research is figure out how to better connect scientists and decision makers so they're communicating with each other. So the scientists have a better idea of how to shape their research, so the byproducts of that research can be more usable for the people who need to make decisions. And most of this focuses on climate change and adapting to climate change. So how do we live a good quality life in the middle of a changing climate with more frequent droughts and drier forests and less water resources? And so I spent before I got to Cal Maritime really working with a lot of different scientists, helping them to shape their research to be more usable in the end. But again, this isn't what every scientist needs to do, and this isn't what science should all be about, because it should also be about fundamental discovery and experimentation and curiosity. But when we have specific problems that need to be addressed, shaping science a little bit, bringing the decision makers and scientists closer together, help us produce more usable science that solves problems.
Give us an example of that whole process, the whole dilemma, and the solution that you are proposing that affects our lives on a day-to-day basis. You did talk about water use and so forth, but tell us how that actually works and comes into play into our lives.
Yeah, well, I mean, one example I might be able to think about is hmm, there are a lot of examples. Um, for for example, managing water resources in California, or in the Colorado River Basin is probably a better example. And we worked with scientists who study snowpack and decision makers who need to know about managing reservoirs, managing the when they let water out, how much water they let out, what time of the year, when they stop letting water out. And so by working with scientists, we were better able to connect their research to the people who are making those decisions. So, for example, understanding, it's kind of hard to describe this without getting really technical, and I don't want to lose people with that. But by taking the questions that the reservoir managers had directly to the scientists, they were able to better shape their research about moisture levels in the soil and snowpack and measuring ability to measure snowpack and water equivalents. So it's just, it kind of gets into the nuts and bolts a bit, but that's what you're doing is really finding a way to connect the two sides together and have them communicate with each other is a big part of it.
What has been the obstacle, or it would seem that that would just be automatic, that that flow of information and the pathways to facilitate that would have automatically been there, but it sounds as though is it just cultural? Is it strategic? Is it politics? What is it that has been the barrier to that being much more organic and natural?
Well, I mean, science itself is pretty independent. Scientists are inspired by problems and curiosity and do their research pretty independently from decision makers and for example, water resource managers. They work very independently. And so part of it is learning to work with the culture of science, to let them know that just because they're looking at a particular problem that decision makers have, like water management in the reservoirs, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not being scientific, that they're not being curious, that they can't also discover really interesting novel things when they're working related to specific problems. So most of my work was with the scientists to work within that culture, and less so with the people who are making decisions.
Mm-hmm. Good. Let's talk about shipping a bit and some of the new areas of research that you are going into. And we know that shipping is a huge thing and much more in the news nowadays because of the supply chain log jams and so forth. And so we've got a little bit more attention that is focused on that. And the matter of autonomous vehicles on all terrains is beginning to become more prominent, and it's happening in shipping as well. And there is the notion that ships will soon, there'll be enough technology that will guide a ship all the way across the ocean without a crew, or at least with very minimal crews, which are already small anyway. And there are the technical fascinations that are associated with that, of course, but the human dynamics and the social dynamics come into play substantially. And you have begun some research in that area, the social dimensions of autonomous shipping. Let me ask you to explore that and then answer the question, is autonomous shipping good for the world?
That's an interesting question. Well, let me start with your question first. I don't think, I almost don't think it's a matter of whether it's good or not good for the world. It's coming. It's coming. Autonomous shipping is coming. And in fact, there are examples all the time of vessels being operated autonomously in coastal routes all over the world. Well, not all over the world, but it's happening right now. There are advantages to autonomous operated vessels. You know, you save costs because you don't have as many people on board, right? You, when you think about, when you look at a ship and see the big superstructure of the house, that's there to house people. You have fewer people on board or no people on board, you can carry more cargo. They are, you know, reportedly safer, less opportunities to introduce human error. So there are advantages to automated vessels, but there are real questions about, you know, how do we fix them when there's a breakdown at sea? So you'll still probably need humans on board. There are going to be new opportunities in remote operations centers around the world, monitoring autonomous vessels or working in varying degrees with autonomous vessels, because there are degrees of automation. So it's going to be transformative. It's going to transform our industry. It's starting now. The US is behind other countries in terms of, you know, demonstrating the technology. The maritime academies are behind as well in terms of, you know, leading with learning about that technology. I'm interested in what happens to the people involved with autonomous shipping. I'm interested in how we navigate the transition into more autonomous vessels in ways that that lessen the impact on people who are engaged in the maritime industry. I don't think autonomous shipping isn't something we can stop. So the question is, how do we make this a successful transition and minimize the negative impacts that happen? And so that's one of the things that I'm interested in, looking at the autonomous shipping, and then also how to train the next generation. Since I work at a maritime academy, you know, I'm interested in how you train the next generation of seafarers who are going to be entering into a world that is becoming more and more autonomous, varying degrees of autonomy as their career progresses. And so hopefully making them realize that they have opportunities, different kinds of opportunities, and helping them to understand, you know, how to leverage that and be prepared for, you know, disruption in their industry.
I'm glad that you said that about being concerned about the people and the displacement that some of which will inevitably take place. Technology just, you know, does that. That's embedded into technological advancement. But we're talking about, and let's talk about it at the seafarer level. About 2.5 million seafarers worldwide, I believe, is that workforce. Many of them from poorer countries, and many of them certainly not in the upper echelons as it relates to educational achievement and so forth. It doesn't mean that they're not smart. They just chose a pathway either by choice or by circumstance to be in those jobs that didn't require high educational achievement. Who is doing the work? Is there a concentrated effort now? Because when we talk about anything international, there is the idea of cooperation and one world, we're all one planet. There is a lot of acknowledgement for that. And we do have structures for that, like the United Nations, the IMO, and the ILO, except in most instances, they have a bully pulpit and the force of persuasion, but not the force of enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And are you hearing anything about what's going on there, or what would be your prescription for making certain that, for example, people who are displaced are put in a position to transition into either the new jobs in this industry or some kind of boost to be able to maintain livelihoods in other industries?
Yeah. Well, I think we're a ways away from that right now, only because if we look at the maritime industry today, the number of autonomous vessels is very small and experimental, but we're also experiencing a shortage of mariners internationally and nationally. I mean, we had a graduation at Cal Maritime last weekend, and there was a member, a union recruiter there with a big sign. And when students walked, the graduation was over, they'd thrown their hats and they were walking out. He was there recruiting for jobs that he could put them on a ship that day. So there's a shortage of mariners globally and in the United States. So we're not at the point yet where we have to worry too much about the negative impact. But it's better to be proactive about this than reactive. And I'm afraid that usually in most industries that experience technological disruption like this, they tend to be more reactive about what happens to the people as opposed to proactive. But I think a big part of it is, and what I try to do in one of my classes is to show just how many different opportunities there are to work in the maritime industry, and that it's not just being a third mate on a ship. There are not only a variety of ships that you can work on, but there is marine insurance, and there is maritime management, and there's working in the ports. There's doing your work, that could also be a part of it. So any number of opportunities out there. And I think that, this generation is, it's not my parents' generation where you went to work for a company and you stayed with that company for your life. The young people today are going to have to invent and reinvent themselves depending on what's going on. And it's about giving them the tools to do that if and when they're displaced due to automation. But like I said, with more increased automation, there are going to be other opportunities, new kinds of jobs that are developed in response to that, and new opportunities that we may not know about right now. So it's about being nimble in your career and having the training that you need to move forward.
Yes. Let's talk about the broadness of the maritime industry and the sector itself. It is probably the oldest of the worldwide professions. It's been here forever, and the more that we are advancing technologically, scientifically, educationally, and culturally, the more we are finding about our ocean waters and how important that they are to us. But as an industry, it still is perceived as, and from a numerical standpoint, still is a male-dominated industry. So let's talk for a second, in the spirit of the International Day for Women in Maritime. Let's talk for a second about, first, what unique perspective and contributions have women made? Have you, as a woman, made? What's the secret sauce that you have brought to the roles that you are in, that have enriched the sector and the places that you have operated? And as a paradigm, I mean, as an example for what any woman is able to bring, just from your perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think any woman brings their whole life experience with them when they go to work on a ship. They bring their personality, they bring their values, they bring their optimism, their enthusiasm, their professionalism. They bring their whole person. And there have actually been some research done, and it shows that by having women on board, it sort of normalizes the culture a little bit on board. So there are a lot of advantages to it. I mean, just on a very practical level, we're in a mariner shortage. And given that only about 2% of mariners are women, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity for the industry if more women were involved. But I wouldn't presume to say what I bring to a ship as a woman, but I know that I try to bring my whole self, and I didn't always do that. I think I learned as I went along of how to navigate being on a ship. But there at times it can be very difficult. We know from reading in popular maritime magazines and newspapers that there are real issues with sexual assault and sexual harassment still in the maritime industry. I've experienced some of that firsthand. And so there are real difficulties that a woman can face in this industry, or anyone who can face, who looks different or acts different or sounds different. So real challenges, but we're also fighting hard to make shipping a more inclusive and accepting place for anyone who wants to do a job and do it well. And that should be the norm that we strive for, is, can you do the job? And if you can do it, great. It doesn't matter who you are. Come and be a part of the team. That's what we should be striving for.
Great. Well, in our final few moments, which we've got about 2 or 3 left, name for us a few of the women in maritime in the Bay Area. We're kind of rich in some of the female talent and leadership in the Bay Area. Tell us a couple of names that come to mind for you about women in maritime.
Well, I think probably the woman who first comes to mind is Captain Lynn Corwatch. She's fantastic. She's a role model. She's great at what she does. She's gives back to organizations that she's a part of, and gives back to Cal Maritime. She's a Cal Maritime grad. So, I mean, I think she's at the top of the list for.
What does she do now?
I believe she's, oh gosh, off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly, and I don't want to get it wrong either.
She's the executive director of the Marine Exchange.
Marine Exchange, yeah, that's what I thought. Good, I'm glad I didn't have it completely wrong then. So, but she's fantastic, and she's a great role model for young women and men to see what you can do with a Cal Maritime degree. And in this industry, if you stay focused and apply yourself, it's like, the opportunities are endless.
Yes.
But Yeah.
Yes. To speak about Lynn Korwatch for a second, I think it was maybe a week ago that Marine Exchange hosted a May Day and Maritime Day reception in Oakland, and I had the opportunity to chat with her for a few moments and to talk about when she first became, and I believe that she was the first or one of the first female captains of
Yeah.
a commercial ship
Yes.
in the United States. And
Yeah.
she took that position when she was pregnant.
Yeah.
And there's a picture of her in a newspaper, and we talked about that and so forth. And I'll share some of her family business. That same child who was in her stomach at that time is getting married this weekend.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yes, getting married on Saturday. It was a young
Awesome.
man, and he's getting married on Saturday, but she
Oh,
is indeed one of the great ones.
yeah.
Captain Ann McIntyre at the Bar
Absolutely.
Pilots as
Absolutely.
well is
Yeah.
one. And these people are right here in the Bay, in the Bay Area.
Yeah, absolutely. And Anne is great. Again, a real leader and role model, and another Cal Maritime alumna.
Yes, you all are everywhere.
Yeah.
And so for those who are listening, if you are of the at the point in your life when you are pursuing and deciding on careers, as Elizabeth has just said, the field of maritime is vast, it is varied, it is exciting, it is interesting, and it is very, very, very important. The sea and the ocean is important. We often think of, and when we stand on a shore and look at a huge ocean, we think of separation. But in point of fact, the ocean is the only thing that actually connects us.
Yeah.
You cannot drive across the globe.
No.
You can fly, but you're flying across the water that connects us. So water connects us geographically, from a food standpoint, from a weather standpoint, from income and trade standpoint, and from a social and cultural standpoint. If you are in the United States, and unless your ancestors grew out of the ground in the United States, they got here on a boat.
Yeah.
No question about it. They came on water. So maritime is very, very, very important. And if you are a young person who is with us today, certainly consider it. Take a look at it. Cal Maritime is a great resource. We have the Bay, blessed with the Bay Area, which is a maritime center in the world, and a lot of talented and passionate people like our guest, Elizabeth, and some of the others that we have named. So I would recommend that you take a good look at those careers. And if you are not, the oceans are of concern to all of us because it is our life source. More things live in the ocean by a multiple of probably 100,000 than do live on Earth species. So it is should be the source of both wonder and amazement for us, but also care and concern, and deserves our time and effort. We have come to the close of our time, and I'm so delighted that Elizabeth McNie was able to spend some time with us to kick off our Maritime Culture Currents series, as well as to observe the inaugural International Day for Women in Maritime.
Yay.
Yes, we thank all of you for joining us. We do have another session on the Seafaring Channel tomorrow, Maritime Culture Currents, with Dr. Kevin Dawson from UC Merced. He is going to speak with us about the spiritual meaning of water in the maritime heritage of African Americans. Water has very, very, very profound spiritual meaning, and this will be the first of several series that Dr. Dawson does for us. We'll start out tomorrow. It's called Passing Through the Waters, the spiritual meaning of water in the African American maritime heritage. We invite you to join us again on the Seafaring channel. We thank you for joining us today, and have a great and wonderful day, and go out and look at and appreciate and hug some water. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Robert.
Bye-bye.